what I do to push through that is I will put on what I call my cloak of invincibility. Not invisibility, invincibility. What a cloak of invincibility basically is, I'm here to help somebody. I'm here to try and find people to help. Nobody rejects Wonder Woman. Nobody rejects Superman. Nobody rejects Batman, Spider-Man. Those are the heroes. We adore those heroes. And when you put on this cloak of invincibility and you're there to help people, you're empowered to do great things.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Thrive and Achieve with your host, Dr. Matt Markle. Thrive and Achieve is the only podcast where professionals help professionals to succeed in career and wealth. Now, here's your host, Dr. Matt Markle.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Thrive and Achieve, where professionals help professionals thrive in their career and achieve financial success. Today, I am super excited to introduce Frank Agin. Now, many of you know I recently spoke at an event for writers, and the wonderful lady that organized that also organizes a series of networking events, some virtual and some in person. Well, I attended one of the virtual ones that was co-hosted by Frank, and I knew right then that this was a person I wanted to meet. Frank has made a career out of networking. He's got a great story. He has insights that can help everyone from a professional going to a conference to a business owner going to yet another networking event. And he's just a wonderful guy. Frank, welcome to Thrive and Achieve.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you here. And let's get started by talking a little bit about your professional journey. Tell us how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, went off to college. I actually went to play football, did really well in school because I don't want to get kicked off the football team. It was a small college. That led me to going to law school. Ended up at the Ohio State University, got a law degree, got an MBA from Ohio State. I guess to back up, my parents, my dad was a professor, my mom was an educator, my stepmom's an educator. So I kind of grew up in that world. It was very non-entrepreneurial, very organization oriented. Get into one of these big organizations and just hang on for 40 years. And I really wasn't interested in that. So I went to law school, got a law degree, got an MBA, left and went into public accounting. I was a tax consultant, which was really a good job, great pay, lot of interesting contacts, learned a lot. But I didn't want to be mired down in the tax world forever. So I decided to leave and go into private practice. And I tell people that a funny thing happened to me when I went into private practice. And the funny thing was that nothing happened. I had no idea how to get clients. Again, I have these parents, they're very academic oriented. They didn't understand. We never talked about business, sitting around the table. We talked about math and science and things like that. And they don't teach you how to network when you're in school. They sort of just play lip service to it, right, Matt? It's just like, yeah, you should network, learn to network. And the person who's saying that really doesn't know what they're doing because they've never had to do it. They have a job, but they're just kind of like, yeah, go do this thing that we don't understand either, and good luck. So I found myself really needing to do something to be successful in the entrepreneurial world. And somebody suggested I get into a tips club or a leads group. And many people are probably familiar with organizations like BNI. It's one of our big competitors. Well, there was an organization here in town. It was based out of Pittsburgh. It wasn't BNI. Very similar. They brought together entrepreneurs, sales reps, professionals into a weekly meeting. We met every week. We developed relationships. We learned about each other. We learned how we could help each other. And just through that process, we did. And I started to become successful through that with my law practice. And I was successful in that environment and successful helping others make that environment work. And so I had an opportunity to be that organization's first franchisee, and then ultimately had a chance to buy out my operations like 6 years later. And I decided at that point, this is 20 some years ago now, to stop practicing law and become a student of networking, a student of understanding why networking works, why it doesn't work, why people get referrals, why people don't get referrals. And that's kind of led me on this quest of continually trying to gather information. I've written a number of books on the topics of networking, have a few more planned, really geared around helping people become successful with referrals and really taking full advantage of networking. Have a podcast that's 880 some episodes and climbing. And I don't see an end in sight. There's always something interesting to talk about or someone interesting to talk to related to the topics of professional relationships and business networking.
That's amazing. That's really great. And I love the concept, a student of networking, because we're always learning, whether
Yeah.
we're new to this or we've been at this for quite a while, we're always learning. There's some new thing or some new way to understand the human psyche and how people
Yeah.
connect and so forth. So it's just been really, in my journey on this, has been very exciting. And I know I've still got a ton left to learn, but I don't think that you'll hit a limit on what you can learn. So
Yeah.
that's really great insight.
Yeah, it's interesting because like with taxes, the taxes are always changing. Every time there's a Congress, there's this and there's that. So there's always lots to learn because it's man-made changes. With the notion of networking, which is really just a fancy way of saying building relationships, our relationships are as old as time. We really, as humans and how humans interact, there has been no real appreciable change in how we interact. Yes, there's LinkedIn and those sorts of things, which are just tools for interaction, but the whole notion of building trust and establishing relationships and communicating one-to-one is really, really still the same.
I think what I get more and more excited about is when we understand why something is like this. Why do people react like this?
Yeah.
And that's where even just in the recent few decades, just naming all the different biases that we have, confirmation
Yes.
bias, all
Yes.
those, the affinity bias, those sorts of things where we now know how it works versus just what it is. So I think, and we see that in science all the time too. Like we know that something works long before we know why it works.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's for me, I try to back to the whole notion of being a student of it is really get mired down into science because for years I would read networking books and it's like, okay, have a good handshake. Why? What's happening? Why does that matter? And maybe it's not important to understand the why, but for me it is because then you can start to extrapolate the answer to that onto something else that's happening, right? Hey, we need to get off of Zoom and get more face-to-face meetings. You have your clients, people listening to this who are like, well, I'm going to do my interviews on Zoom and then that'll be good enough, or I'm going to do whatever, that's great. You don't have to put pants on. But there's so much more power to being in a room with somebody, shaking their hand, having a small talk conversation.
Absolutely. The concept of knowing why something works allows you to move, to use like a restaurant example, allows you to move from being just a cook to a chef. Cook can implement a recipe. They can follow a recipe, and sometimes very, very well, very,
Yes.
very meticulously with great precision. But they don't, you ask them to like create something else and like, yeah, I don't know. I know how to make this thing, right? I know firm handshake. That's what that works. But you don't know why. So you can't extrapolate that into other things as well, or use that in the other, that physical connection,
Yeah.
to see the value of that again, vice a Zoom call, for example. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, you're very successful, extremely prolific author, great podcast, 800 episodes. We're not quite there yet on Thrive and Achieve, but
It's okay.
but we're on our way. Was there a defining moment in your career that really shaped how you think about what success is?
It's interesting. You call me being very successful and you can't see the water you're swimming in. Right. I mean, it's, sometimes I have this conversation with my wife. It's like, there are days and I can look at all the things I've achieved, and I've written a lot of books and I've achieved a lot. And if I stop and put it down on paper, it can be awe-inspiring. But I look at myself sometimes and, people look at me and think like I'm this fleet of 18-wheelers. Man, he has got it. And I look at myself as I'm just riding this little tricycle, just trying to make it all work. And I just think that's probably human nature. We're all very hard judges on ourselves. But, as far as epiphanies go, again, my parents, I had this, I've had two siblings, a brother and a sister, and we all became self-employed in January of 1995. My dad was like, "Oh my God, what is going on?" It's like we came home with, excuse me. with tattoos all over our face or something like that. He had no idea like what's happening to my kids. He didn't understand that. But his whole notion was you get degrees, you work hard, you just kind of land it somewhere, and you're kind of insulated. That's less true than it probably was 20, 25 years ago, certainly 40 years ago when he got started. But just learning the whole notion of networking was really kind of a game changer for me. That there are people around me and all the answers are around me, all the solutions, all the potential success, figuring out how to find somebody to edit a book or how to design a cover or, what the ISBN number is about. You've written a book. It's, there's a lot to it, more than just putting words on paper, having a podcast, it's just trying to piece that all together. And I have a lot of episodes and I am still learning. I'm still, I look at what you're doing. It's like, I should try that. That would be better, and you'll look at me and say the same thing. And that's the whole notion of networking is that there are people around us that can, they're not going to change our world per se, but they're going to give us the tools that we can be empowered to change our own lives. And once I realized that, it's like, to me, this is fascinating. I'll never lack for friends. I'll never lack for somebody to talk to. I'll never lack for somebody that I can help, somebody that can help me.
And it keeps it fun. It
Yeah.
really keeps it fun. Because business being whether you're a professional, W-2 professional like I was for 35 years or what I'm doing now with the Thrive and Achieve and Anti-Preneur, it can be a grind. It can be a grind. It can be lonely.
Yes.
Finding the networking opportunities, meeting people, having relationships, and learning from them just keeps things fun. So that's what I like about it. So I'm going to circle back to like you're a lawyer. You had this epiphany that if I don't start doing something, my business is going to go under. The networking. Take me through a little bit of that. What was like kind of the first thing that you changed, or as you decided you've got to do something different because nothing was happening and you want something to happen?
Yeah. Well, when I decided to buy into this business, which is called Spirit Business Connections, I remember having a conversation with my wife about it because, I probably just had my student loans paid off. I'd gone to school. They have a joint degree program at Ohio State. So I got an MBA and a law degree all at the same time, and put a lot of schooling in and was really kind of devoted to this career and decided to really pivot off of it. But if you stop and think about business, let's just think about business in general. What are all businesses trying to do? They're trying to differentiate, right? That's how you become successful. McDonald's and Burger King are very different. I mean, they're the same, but they're very different in what they serve and how they market themselves. And you can look at any two competitors out there, and that's the whole thing is, hey, I am different. It should work that way in the career space as well, right? If you're the CFO of a company or, somebody lower or mid-level manager or whatever, how do you make yourself different? You've got to stand out. So you've got to figure out how to stand out. So as I'm looking at this career in law and this opportunity to get into do this networking thing, I told my wife, I said, if I continue on this path of being an attorney, I know where I'll be 30 years from now. And it's not a bad destination, but I know where I'll be. And law schools are churning out hundreds of new lawyers every year. And so it's not different. I'm just following a path that somebody else has created and just really living someone else's life. But if I do this other thing and do something different, I don't know where it leads me. I hadn't written any books or done anything. Podcast is all new. You and I wouldn't have never met. I would be down at the Franklin County Courthouse dealing with people who got arrested overnight. It's just, and so it's this wonderful journey, and that's what excites me about it. And I think that's probably why I got out of public accounting, got out of that career, because it's like you can look ahead and you can see other people's lives and say, you know what, okay, that's neat, but it's not me. So I'm continually looking for ways to differentiate, even differentiating our business from other competitors, always trying to find what's that angle, what can make me different. And that applies to people in the career world as well. What makes you different? Are you showing up 30 minutes early, staying a little later? Are you, coming up, doing something innovative? There's lots of things, but it's all just a function of, okay, how can I differentiate? How can I have a unique life?
Right. The unique selling proposition we use in a lot of circles that I'm
Yeah.
in is like,
Yeah.
what's your
y-
USP, right?
Yeah.
And that can be for a business, that can be for a division, that could be for professional. What is your the marketing people have kind of taken over some of that they'll say like, what's your brand, right? And I think that what's your brand, what's your USP, what's your differentiator? Those are all kind of like different facets of the same entity on that. But it is important because otherwise there's no reason to choose you over somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess we should maybe do a little bit of networking. When we say a little bit of definitions. I think we should do a little bit of definitions. When we say networking, a lot of people think of that's either getting on LinkedIn, trying to remember their password to LinkedIn and getting on LinkedIn, or going to something and handing out a bunch of business cards. But that's clearly not what it is. Walk me through what networking really means to you.
Yeah. Well, my definition of it is two or more people working towards their mutual benefit, right? You know, truth be told, I'm an introvert. I don't like going to networking events. I love helping people. I love to interact with people. I'm not really into those events. I'll go. It's not my favorite thing to do, and it's not the most productive thing to do. I'll go there and I'll meet people, and from there, I try to have one-on-one conversations with people. And whenever I sit down with people, it's like I will always ask myself, and I don't always have an answer in the moment, but I'm always trying to find the answers. How can I help this person? What can I do to help this person? Who can this person that I know help? And just kind of work that problem and just trust the notion that we as humans are really built to reciprocate. Meaning, if somebody does something nice for us, most humans just are like, yeah, I've got to find a way, or they just feel some sort of compulsion to do something, whatever it is. You know, and so that's really what networking is at its core, is just, finding ways to help other people. It's not always about getting to know new people. It can be about getting to know the people you already know better. So if you're in a corporate environment, you're coming in, and I've teased my wife about it because she's had a corporate position. She knows the person to the cubicle to the left and the right and her superior, right? And that's it. It's probably a little more complicated than that. But, how well do you know those people? How well do you know the people, someone down in shipping who you may email with from time to time? Why not just say, hey, listen, let's go grab lunch in the cafeteria. I would really like to learn a little more about what your day looks like and share a little bit about mine. What's the purpose of that? I don't know where that goes, but it's not going to hurt to understand that. And I think that's what happens a lot of times in business. Is I know when I was in public accounting, I was in the tax department. We would look at the audit department as like, what a waste. We don't know what those people do, right? And they're looking at us saying the same thing. And in reality, we're both important pieces of the bigger picture. And to be able to sit down with them and say, well, okay, now I get it. Now I get why what you're doing really feeds into what I'm doing, and what I'm doing feeds back into what you're doing, and we need to support each other.
Stay with us. We'll be right back to Thrive and Achieve. If you're looking for more information about how to help W-2 employees, check out the Amazon #1 bestseller, Anti-Preneur. It's available on Kindle and now in paperback. Now back to the show.
That's a really, really great point in there, that getting to know the people that you already know better. How many times do we force ourselves to stop at like a superficial level of conversation? You see some, maybe the coworker in the cubicle next to you or whatever, like, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. How you doing? Good, good. Yeah, what'd you do over the weekend? I went to this. Okay, good. And then it kind of stops there.
Yeah.
But you don't really get into the real details of them, and the really interesting, cool aspects of them as a person, which might open up a whole bunch of other things. And I also love the concept you said of like thinking about how you can help somebody. I was in a mastermind group where we meet different people in there, and I used to always be introduced to different people, and I used to think like, okay, this is going to be the time I meet Bill Gates, or this is going to be the time I meet the president or something like that. Yeah, you do meet some really, really great people, but you can't just always be thinking about that. And I was like getting a little frustrated because I didn't meet enough presidents or whatever.
Right.
And I basically reset my expectations. I was like, I'm going to go into this and focus only on how I can help this person. Nothing for me at all. How can I truly help this person? And things just really changed. First of all, I liked it a lot better. Second, the relationships that I created out of that were, 10 to 50 times deeper and stronger. So just thinking about truly about how we can help one another as opposed to what can we get from one another is really just a great insight.
What I tell people is you just never know. You never know where contacts are going. One of the stories I write about in one of my books is when I was in public accounting, parking downtown, I parked in this particular parking garage. It was close to the office. It was inexpensive. The catch was you had to leave your keys because they were moving cars around all day to just kind of maximize cars in the garage. And so I just made the decision early on, consciously, but not really understanding where it might lead. I need to say hello and play nice with these people who are, really dealing with my biggest asset at that point in time. I didn't own a house. I had an apartment. But at any rate, there was one particular woman, her name was Twyla, and she worked the keyboard, right? I would, bring your keys. Hey, this level, this spot, and she would put them on there and know how things needed to be moved. And so every day I would just say, hey, Twyla, how you doing? How's your daughter? She had pictures there. How's your granddaughter doing? Oh, you went to the zoo. That's really cool. That was it, right? Now, mind you, Matt, there are attorney types coming and going every day from this particular parking garage. One day, Twyla stopped me and she said, how would you like to be an extra in a movie? They're shooting, my daughter's in this modeling agency or this agency, and they're shooting this movie and they need attorney types to be in this movie, and they're shooting it just north of Columbus where I'm at. I'm like, well, why not? Right? Who knows? I'll go do this and be an extra in a movie. Sounds like fun. Well, it turned out to be the Shawshank Redemption, and I got cast to be a prisoner, which is totally funny. In the Shawshank Redemption, I'm in the opening prison yard scene. I got to spend an entire day on set with the likes of Morgan Freeman. Tim Robbins wasn't part of the movie at that point in time. But the point I try to make is that you don't know. Hundreds of attorneys walked by this woman, didn't give her the time of day. And all I'd said was, hey, how's your day? How's your daughter? How's whatever? And she developed an affinity towards me. I don't know if she ever remembered my name. She called everybody honey, and that's fine, but something came of it. So you just don't know when you're out meeting people, what's going to be happening. And too often people they try to be calculating. They want to know exactly where this is going. Okay, I'll take the time to go meet somebody 3 cubicles down, but they want to do the math. They want to extrapolate. What could this be for me? Could this get me promoted? Could this get me a better raise? And in reality, it's like, you don't know, it doesn't matter. You don't know how people are connected.
And so the royalty checks for that basically paid for they sponsored all the books and everything.
Yeah, no, I got paid. I took a day's vacation to get paid minimum wage. So, but yeah.
No, that's amazing, and just so important also. Whether we think of it as networking or whether we think of it as just being a good person, saying hi, saying thank you, saying how are you doing to the people around us makes everybody's life better. We put good into the world, and I believe that good comes back to you because of you doing that. I don't know how many times in my life I've kind of been in a bad mood or in a bad headspace or whatever, and I see a friend of mine and they do a big smile or whatever, and boom, immediately it's I'm like in a much better mood. They say one thing of like, hey, great to see you, or thank you again, or for whatever, just something that resets it back into this fact that we're humans and we're connected.
Yeah. Well, it really comes down to brain science. They did a study over in Poland, and what they did was they put a young woman on the street and asked her to approach other women walking alone. And she approached 100 women, done at random. 50 she would go up to and say, would you buy a candle for me? And then the other 50, what she would do is go up to and just say, hey, how are you doing? And then the person would respond, I think it was, how was your day? Well, I'm having a bad day. Oh, I'm sorry you're having a bad day. Would you buy a candle for me? Or I'm having a great day. Oh, I'm glad you're having a great day. Would you buy a candle from me? Now, in the control group, where it got right down to brass tacks, would you buy a candle from me? Sold 3 out of 50 people. 3 out of 50 people bought a candle. In the experimental group, where they had this little small talk conversation, and Matt, that's the smallest small talk conversation we can have, right? Sold 11, a 4-fold increase. And so they go on the study and they talk about what's happening in the human brain, and our brains do a lot of wonderful things. But the most important thing we've had to do as humans in surviving is determine whether we can trust somebody. And so it's called heuristic processing. And when you have that small talk conversation with somebody, you kind of short circuit the whole developing of trust process. And the brain says, oh, I can trust this person. They were nice to me. And so it gets back to your point of, just say hello. And again, we now know what's going on. And because we know, we can take advantage of it. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way, but just knowing that, hey, there's power of taking the time to stop and just talk to an underling that may otherwise feel marginalized or overlooked. Those things have value.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some details. When you walk into a room of strangers, I know you mentioned you're a little bit of an introvert, and that's not your favorite gig. But how do you decide who to go up to, who to meet? How do you get? Because I know that a lot of people will be in that same situation. They'll be put in a room. They might know one person there, and that person's off in a conversation somewhere. So they've got to do something there. How do we get them out of that just like paralysis feeling?
Yeah, well, the first thing is just showing up, right? And a lot of people talk, this gets into a little bit of science, but we as humans throughout human history, we developed early on in tribes of about 150. And there's a reason for 150. I won't get into it, but we developed in these tribes, and you lived your entire life with this tribe of about 150 people. And if you saw a stranger, it generally wasn't a good thing. And so we are hardwired for eons and eons to understand that strangers aren't good things. So there's this natural aversion to going into events, right? I'm Mr. Network. I can feel it. Hey, Frank, wouldn't you want to just stay in your car? Wouldn't you want to come back to your office, right? We all feel that. And you just need to push through that. But what I do to push through that is I will put on what I call my cloak of invincibility. Not invisibility, invincibility. And the cloak of invincibility basically is, I'm here to help somebody. I'm here to try and find people to help. Now, nobody rejects Wonder Woman. Nobody rejects Superman. Nobody rejects Batman, Spider-Man. Those are the heroes. We adore those heroes. And when you put on this cloak of invincibility and you're there to help people, all of a sudden you're empowered to do great things. And so you walk in, getting back to your point, you walk in and it's like the person is off there talking to somebody else, and man, I just want to make my way over there. But they're engaged in conversation. That would be rude. I need to do something. What I tell people to do is, just come in and position yourself somewhere in kind of the flow of traffic, maybe around the coffee, because people end up over by the coffee or the bar or wherever the pastries are, depending upon the event. And just make eye contact with people, smile and say hello. A lot of people will make eye contact, smile, and just walk on by, and that's fine. But you'll likely run into somebody who will smile and say hello, and there's an engagement there, right? There's no words, but there's some sort of engagement. You just put your hand out and just say, "Hey, my name is," and you just kind of from there get into a conversation. What I coach people on as far as getting into those conversations is don't get down to brass tacks, right? Hey, I sell ad specialty items. Who you use for your ad specialty items? Who's your financial advisors? No, I don't do any of that stuff. Small talk. I'll give you an example. I was at an event. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. We get snow, and it was a particular snowy Friday. I'm off to this event, and it wasn't horrible, but it was a fair amount of snow, big fluffy flakes. So I'm at the event, and I get lock in with this one person, and my first words were, "Oh my God, can you believe this snow?" Because we don't get snow all the time. It was a little unusual. "Oh my God, can you believe this snow?" And her response was, "Oh my gosh, I love the snow. My husband and I, we ski all the time." Now, I grew up in Michigan, ski country, and so here's the talking point, right? I'm going to talk about skiing with her. My sister skied competitively, where do you go? Ohio's pretty flat, so you have to go somewhere. Where do you go to ski? Talking about all the stuff and how did you get into it? And we're not talking about business at all. We're talking about skiing, right? And so at one point in the conversation, I just kind of morphed over to, well, skiing's is a very expensive sport. What do you do to pay for it? Right. So I'm naturally just kind of transitioned into talking about her business. She does whatever. And she kind of elaborated. I had some questions. And one of the tips I will encourage people on or coach people on with respect to working a room is don't worry about what you have to say, get them talking. Be very interested in them. They will turn the tables on you in time. So her and I, we went back and forth. She asked about me and so on and so forth. At no point is there any talk about business or referrals or any of that stuff in this 20-minute conversation. But at one point I said, if you don't get hurt skiing this weekend, because it's a Friday, if you don't get hurt skiing this weekend, she had let me know she was going somewhere. If you don't get hurt, I'd love to set up coffee maybe next week and we could have a more in-depth conversation about what you do, right? And maybe how I can help you. Sure. Nobody rejects that. So it's, maybe it's easier said than done. And like anything, it takes practice. But we all tie our shoes. We were never good at tying our shoes when we first got started. And you just practice a little bit. So you go into an event and sometimes it's not going to work out well. Sometimes it doesn't work out well for me, but you just kind of keep after it. And in time, good things will come from that.
That's fantastic. I love the cloak of invincibility, because what I think a lot of people feel is they may feel that everyone in the room knows everyone else in the room, and they're the only one who's the outsider. So there's now a little bit of an imposter syndrome going on.
Yeah.
There's a feeling of lack of worth. Like, oh, I shouldn't even be here. I should go back to my car. I've got so many things to do. I should just go back to the office and get stuff done. But when you put on the cloak of invincibility, it changes all that. Now you are a superhero. You have convinced yourself you're a different persona that has something of value, and it's a travesty if you don't get to share that with someone. When you do that, that just changes everything. Now you're not an imposter, you are a superhero. And just that mental reframing of who you are going into this, and the positive aspect of, like, you're not trying to go into here to get a bunch of leads and sell things, or if you're going to a professional conference, you're not trying to, like, find out who's hiring and who's not, or who's having troubles or whatever. You're there to add this value that you have because you're a superhero. And I think that will be a great way for anyone who's listening to this that struggles with just getting in the room and doing something other than just going straight to the bar or straight to the pastries. Then, realize that you have a value to give and you're not an imposter. That just changes everything in your mindset.
Yeah. The other thing I would encourage people to do is maybe keep a journal of the people you've talked to and what comes of it. I get CRMs and, putting people in CRMs and that's fine. But just even a journal where you could start to see, it's kind of like savings, Matt, right? When if you have a piggy bank when a kid, just like you're putting nickels and dimes in, and it doesn't feel like a lot, but in time it grows. And it's the same thing with respect to this. In time, you'll see, wow, I am really building a network here. I've got this person. We've had coffee and we know each other well enough that I could call them up and introduce them to somebody else, or maybe ask them a favor. Hey, would you come on my podcast? Would you introduce me? I see you're connected to this person on LinkedIn. How well do you know them? Would you be willing to introduce me? And so then all of a sudden those relationships start to blossom. But it's a question of showing up. Too many people talk themselves out of it. I'm too busy. No, you're not. You can make time. You can do it.
Awesome. So journal, that's a great idea. Any other routines or systems or journal or CRM? What else do you use that people could start, just tactically implementing right now?
Yeah. What I do with respect to events, when I'm going to events, is when I leave, I might drive, half mile down the road or a mile down the road, and then just pull over and have thank you notes. And in the moment, be able to just write people notes. Yeah, you need to bake in a little space after the event so you can do this. Really only takes about a half hour. I guess the other thing I will say, Matt, with respect to being at an event, and I've got a friend out there, Berta Medina, and her saying is if I'm at an event with 5 people, I try to get 5 business cards. When I'm at an event with 200 people, I try to get 5 business cards. What she's saying is, don't try to meet the room. Don't try to meet everybody. Don't be calculating. Just meet people. Everybody there is connected to other people. So you're leaving there and you've got 5 business cards or 5 people's contact information. Writing them a quick note. Handwritten notes are great. I save all the handwritten notes I get. I save them all. somebody sends me something, I don't print emails. I mean, that's nice, but handwritten note, yeah, that's somebody took some time. Put a stamp on this. I love it. But take the time to do that and kind of set yourself apart, because a lot of people who are leaving that same event are not going to follow through at all. And if they follow through, they're going to do it in, I don't want to say an unprofessional way, but certainly not a memorable way, or not a positive, memorable way. Just send a quick note. Hey, thanks for taking the time. I will follow up, or, you're probably getting this after we've had coffee, but I still wanted to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And, it's just those things register in a very positive way.
I love the idea of thank you notes. I don't do that personally after networking events as much, but in the last several roles where I was a C-suite executive, I always had thank you cards made, printed with my name on it and the company name and so forth. And, from Dr. Matt, the CEO, whatever. But I'd always handwrite something on there for people that did really well or were going through a tough time or whatever. And I'd either mail them to their house. That was what I usually did. Was I had them mailed, had my just mail them to people's house, find out and get their addresses as we have it on file, and just send it to their house. That way, it's not like it takes it out of the workplace and into their home life when they're sitting at home. Well, shoot, Dr. Matt wrote me a nice wow, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just blows your mind because nobody does that anymore. But even if you don't want to go to that level after a networking event, just sending the follow-up email. I don't know how many people just don't even do that, but send the follow-up email. And then now you've gone from you basically crossed a chasm of, yeah, this is a person that wants to engage and wants to have a relationship, to that was a person who we met while we were in line for martinis at the bar or whatever. So
Right. Well, and the other thing I say with respect to that is find ways to help people, So back to my story about this woman who skied, I might find an article on skiing, right? Just something online. Hey, I stumbled across this. I thought you might find it interesting, or, they're heading to wherever. Hey, I saw that it got all the snow. Right. So you're building a relationship, and I remember our conversation. You're important to me. Those things just, they carry a lot of value, and good things will come from those things. A lot of times what happens in networking is people feel like it needs to change everything right away. It's like getting on LinkedIn. Yeah, I don't get LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn for a month or so and nothing ever happened. Right. It's like, well, that's not the point. It wasn't supposed to happen overnight. If it were that easy, everybody's world would be changed overnight and the bar would be raised for everybody and you'd still be average, So these things take time. Relationships building takes time.
So a lot of the people that follow our show here are W-2 professionals. So they work in companies. And so they might have some external networking events. Those might be limited to like technical conferences or industry things. But I think there's a big opportunity for them inside their company. Any tips for like networking within your company and how to think about that and because I think if you do that well, it can be a true superpower for you and the USP, unique selling proposition differentiator.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think there is a differentiator there, a separator. One of the studies I talk about when I get out and talk, I do a whole talk, I call it networkology, and I really get into the science. And there was a study, it came out in 1973, it was called How to Get a Job. It actually became a book. This guy was doing his doctoral dissertation, I think at Harvard, but how to get a job, and did all this stuff and found out that, and this is going to come back to networking, found out that 70% of the people got their jobs not from postings, but from personal contacts, which is not a surprise, right? I mean, we all know that. That's not shocking. But they really dug into those numbers and realized that the vast majority of those people who got jobs, the contacts they were tapping into weren't people that they knew really well. They were people they kind of knew. My wife and I, we kind of have the same network. Yeah, she knows some people from work that I don't know, and I know people professionally she doesn't know, but we share the same network. And so she's not a great person for me to network with if I need to do some maneuvering career-wise. But it's that person that, maybe we go to church together, and I know their name is Steve, and we wave, and we say hi, and we'll shake hands and talk, and that's it. You said it earlier, very superficial, right? That's a perfect person to say, Steve, we've seen each other here for years. I don't even know your last name. You're here, we're kind of in the same community. I would love to grab a cup of coffee and just see, what's going on in your world and, just learn about you and just have it be more than a friendly hello. Now you can do that in the company as well. You're in audit, I'm in tax. You know what? Let's go grab lunch. It's Friday afternoon. I know neither of us are terribly busy. We'll go grab lunch. And you find out they're married too. They've got kids who are doing whatever. They're on this part of town. They love to fly fish. Geez, that's fascinating. You never know where that's going to go. But all of a sudden you have a connection over there, and then, they can be kind of your window into that world as far as we're doing such and such. Or, you know what, we need to get somebody on this committee. We should get somebody from tax. Well, how about Frank? I know Frank. He's a great guy. Let's get Frank. He'd be a fun person to have here. And you don't know where that goes. All of a sudden, you're on this committee sitting with the CEO that you wouldn't have otherwise met just because somebody that you spent a lunch with. So, that's an easy tactic. And what I would encourage people to do who are listening, your clients, people who are listening, who are W-2 types, set a goal for yourself to do it once a month. Somebody different once a month. And then maybe move it up to once a week. We all take a break for lunch, whatever. Just go down to the cafeteria, have a cup of coffee, or get off site, have a cup of coffee. But if you just start with once a month and it gets down to journaling then, right, you just keep track of the names. Okay, I met with Steve. Okay, Sally, Melinda, all these different people. I need to meet somebody in shipping and receiving. I'm going to find somebody over there. And just start building a roster of all these people and be the most connected person in your company. And be the person who knows a lot about what's going on with all the things in your company. And so somebody in your department saying, I don't understand why we're doing X, Y, and Z. That is stupid. And you can sit up and say, it's really not stupid. And the reason it's not stupid is because there is an HR law out there that we're not aware of. And that's the reason why this is happening. It may seem dumb, but when you get full information, it's not dumb. So that's what I would encourage people to do. If I had a career all over again, that's what I would do in a big company. I would be all over that.
Me too. I've just to share a little bit about myself. It's much easier for me to bring my lunch or grab something quickly and go back to my office and just use that time, because I'm in my last several roles. I've been several roles. I've probably the last 15 years. Just super busy all the time, and just so much responsibility, and it's so much, and to just use that 30 minutes or whatever, using to catch up for the next meeting or whatever. So you eat while you're right in front of your computer. That was, that's been how I typically operate. But I find that when I take the time to not do that and instead go talk to somebody or have lunch with them or have a coffee with them or just do a walk and talk or whatever, things go so much better. So if I were to teach, people ask me sometimes, like, if you could go back and change anything, what would you do? There's very, very few things I would change in my life. Very, very few. But the one thing that I would tell my younger self is take more time to meet more people, develop more relationships. And who knows where that could go. I agree with you. Every role I've had in the last 15 years, actually even more than that, probably since, other than my first job out of college, and even my first job out of college, my big brother in my fraternity called me and said, like, hey, we have some open spots. You want to come down to Florida? And I was in snowy St. Louis. It was a cold season in St. Louis, Missouri that winter, and I was like, yes, Florida, 100%. I don't know what I have to do, like dig ditches or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'll have an engineering degree, but I want out of the cold. And so every job I've had has been through knowing somebody.
Yeah.
So,
well, you talk about your fraternity big brother. If I had to do it all over again, I was in a fraternity as well, and I went to college to play football. I was in the football fraternity. I knew those guys really well. If I had to do it all over again, I would still play football and still be in that fraternity because I love the people. But that was 100% of my world, right? Maybe 90% of my world. I would have made it 50% of my world. I just need to meet other people. And, there are people who were attending school there at any campus whose parents were CEOs or higher ups wherever. Man, I miss the boat. And these are wonderful people. Well, they don't play football. They're not a fraternity. They're not my kind. It's like It was just short-sighted. If I had to do it over again, I would have changed that.
Okay, rapid fire questions. What's one piece of career advice or financial advice that a lot of people believe, but you think is totally wrong?
Career. Wow, that's a career advice totally wrong, or financial advice. Well, I think I think people get caught up in debt. I've been able to do the things that I have been able to do because I was always very careful with money, and my employers, they wanted me to buy a house. They wanted me to do things. They wanted to get a nice car, but it's like, I want to have the flexibility. And my wife is much the same way. Be careful with your money, and pay yourself first, put some money aside, have a nest egg so you don't have to, people who make the worst decision about buying cars are people who need a car like now, right?
Right.
But if you're somebody who like, I need a car in the next year and start looking, you're going to find a great deal. And it's kind of the same thing with career and personal. It's like, set yourself up so you don't have to be in that panic mode.
The concept of like, everyone else has this, so I must have this too,
Yeah.
right? Causes you to not fall into the mindset of pay yourself first. You're paying all these other things, things that everybody else has, right? So they all have a house, they all have a car, they have a second car, they have a boat, they might have everybody else has that, so I must have that too. You can end up, blowing a lot of money that you could be instead using for saving for investments as opposed to liabilities when you do that.
Yeah.
So one last pay it forward, one last lesson for all the listeners today.
Yeah, one of the questions I get all the time is, what's the thing I can do today to kind of get myself networked? And I always tell people, find something you're passionate about and go volunteer. Maybe it's your kid's school, maybe it's a homeless charity, an animal charity or whatever. Just go out and volunteer. Don't overthink it. Well, the CEO's here, or no, just go do it. Go out, something in your company, just get involved, because you're going to instantly find yourself surrounded with people who care about the same thing you do. And they're coming out of their own little world, and they're going to get to know you. They'll get to know you, and that will get you pretty well networked quickly in a very positive way.
Awesome. Frank, you have given us a ton of really useful advice. How can people get in touch with you?
If you go to my website, frankagin.com, my email's there. There's different ways to connect with me. People like to communicate all sorts of different ways. I'll talk to people on LinkedIn, Facebook, email's my thing, but you can find my email there. Yeah, just reach out. If I can help, let me know.
This is super useful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I took what I do in all these. I take a ton of notes. This actually is writing on here. The networking is two or more people working towards a mutual benefit, thinking about how I can help this person. There's a useful piece of advice. Your parking attendant will get you movie gigs.
There you go. You never know.
Don't be calculating on every relationship about, I must know where this is going before you do it. You never know. This concept of the cloak of invincibility, going into a networking event, keeping a journal of who you talk to, following up. Following up is like the big area that most people miss out on. Yeah, and just pick someone you only know a little bit about, and then have a coffee or a lunch with them once a month, and then try to get that up to once a week. Super awesome advice. Frank, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, everybody, we'll see you next time on Thrive and Achieve, where professionals help professionals thrive in their career and achieve financial success. Have a great day, everybody.